Today's presentation is on the right size public outreach. This is Julie Brandt from Parametrix.
So welcome to Right Size Public Engagement. So for those of you, if anybody was here last night, in the closing comments, our host, City of Wenatchee, thank you Wenatchee, the mayor was saying, he made a joke about how he couldn't tell the difference, he was trying to tell the difference between Unicon and Comic-Con. And I thought it was really apt because that's part of my little beginning here, is that I like to tell the story about Comic-Con. I went last month with my 15-year-old, she's a big Avengers fan. Mark Ruffalo was speaking. I was like, okay, we gotta go see the Hulk. And I'm actually a fan of Mr. Ruffalo's more independent film work. But it was great to see him. And they asked him all the stuff about the movies and the costume and everything. But at one point, somebody put him on the spot and said, what advice do you have for young people? And I was like, oh, damn, you know, and he's a movie star. But he's got kids, you know, and he's like, wow. And he really took a beat and he said, you know what? This is a hard time to be alive. And it's a really hard time to be a kid. So he got deep and he was like, you know, remember that humankind generally has a trend toward improvement. So hang in there, keep your head up. And then in the meantime, remember, you know, I would tell kids it's all about relationships. And it's whether it's just your relationships with your people but also it's about, and Ruffalo was like, it's about your relationship with your larger community and your natural environment. And I was like, you tell him, Mark Ruffalo. And the kid's like, Mom, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm not crying, you're crying. And so on behalf of Mr. Ruffalo and myself, I want to thank you all for showing up for this topic. Look at this. We are surface water management professionals trying to figure out how to strengthen relationships. So thank you for being here for this. So let's get started. The idea here is that we all know we live the stormwater world. Stormwater is never the celebrity of, you know, even utilities. Water and sewage get so much more, you know, fame than we do. So the idea is, I know a lot of you are trying to just get these projects done, sometimes with spit and tape, you know, and so, but don't walk away from your public outreach. Don't think that, you know, like, oh, this is a small project, you know, I don't even have time, or I don't have a budget, or my boss won't listen. That's what we're going to go through today. And I'm going to talk about these things. So I really want to set the stage here. What's really important to remember about public outreach. First, try and figure out what you're trying to do. Public outreach comes in a lot of different shapes and forms based on your overall mission. And Chris and I were talking about this last night as far as like, there's legal ramifications of public outreach. So think about your goals. Are you just trying to, like, maybe you have an ecology grant, you're just trying to meet that public outreach requirement there. Maybe you're trying to gain support from your project. Maybe there's litigation going on with your, you know, that there's I don't want to name names, but there was a pretty large project once where they, with good faith, went and did public outreach and then said, okay, the public has spoken and this is what we're going to do. And a bunch of community groups said, wait a minute. And they took it to court. And the Puget Sound, the Pollution Control Hearings Board stopped, you know, shut them down and said no. And it might have even been actual court. Sorry, the Pollution Control Hearings Board is, you know, but and they said, unless you're doing a legal voting process or a scientific poll, and you have folks that know what all the gamuts of doing that are, voices will be unheard. So if you say, oh, I put something up on the web and they said to do this, so I'm just going to do that, you are not representing your community. And it's okay if all you can do is put something up on the web, but recognize your responsibility to keep the decision in-house and use what you've heard from the public as advisement. And that's what we're talking about. So here we've got from IAP2, this is the participation spectrum And you can see how I've got it grayed out. If you need actual empowerment and you want to have like a scientific polling process, hire a professional public outreach firm that can help you with that. Like, you have a big project. But if you have something, don't not do these first two things. Even if you can just get a web page up, and I'm going to show you how to get the word out, you can still involve the public in that, but recognize through the process we're going to talk about today, the final decision still lies within your organization. So getting started, so you're like, okay, I've looked at all these things. I think in the end, we just want to keep the public informed, maybe hear a little bit of feedback, but we're still going to make the decision. So let's go. Write down a plan. And you're like I don't have enough to do already. Part of what I'm talking about here today are like the 14 different SMAPs that Parametrix worked on, but also I've spent 20 years doing, watershed planning and comprehensive plans and stuff like that. For public outreach, for all of these, when we wrote down the plan, it helped everyone organize their thoughts. That way you're going to be able to recognize what your strengths and weaknesses are right away. You might have all sorts of ideas of what you're going to put on the map, but then when you're like, how do we get the word out? Who do we talk to? You'll see those gaps in your plan, and then you'll pause and you'll go spend a little bit more time at the beginning getting that straight. You're going to think about your audience and your stakeholders. We did a lot of brainstorming. We started writing down, sure, we want to make sure to reach out to this group and reach out to this group. And I'm like, wait, do we have, should we reach out to the tribes of this? And 9 times out of 10, it was like, yes, let's make sure they're included. Or what about cooperating agencies? And, for SMAPs, there wasn't, sometimes the extra brainstorming really made a difference. And I'm also going to talk about outreach tools and success metrics and using the feedback, but write that down in your plan. This is the general outline we recommend to get you started. So for your communication strategy, really make sure that you define the project before going out to the public. So I worked with City of Bothell on their SMAP, and thank goodness for Janet Gear. It was like 2-3 years ago, and she's like, we want to start early. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. And so we went out, we started doing public meetings, and the public was kind of like, we said, oh, what are you interested in? What do you want for stormwater? And they're like, we don't know exactly what it is you're asking us. So remember too, when you're speaking to the public, they are intelligent, never dumb something down. We're going to talk a bit in a moment about plain talk, but that doesn't mean dumb talk, So, we go out to these intelligent members of the public, and we're like, hey, what should we do? And they're like, that's your job. You should tell us what the options are. So we're like, hold please, went back, and like, a few months later came back and said, hey, here's these options. This came up yesterday. We were talking in the SMAP workshop about how do you frame the questions. It really helps to have survey questions set up ahead of time for your audience. Make sure that they are fair and balanced. My neighbors started a little community group, and I'm not even gonna start about what they call a green street, and they stuck this planter out in the middle of the road. It was a whole thing. So, but one of the survey questions they said is, do you value the safety of children? And I'm like, that's not a survey question. Who are you people? Come talk to me. Attend my thing. So, needless to say, I got the city of Seattle. And so provide balanced questions, like we were talking about and you'll see one later. We did a pairwise comparison. It's that you can do a web search for that. It's been around there was like a French mathematician that invented it 200 years ago. But it's that thing of like, do you prefer Coke or Pepsi or RC or RC or Coke? And you deliberately have kind of like 3 different things. And we asked folks, if you had to choose, do you prefer keeping streets clean, or do you want us to plant more vegetation next to the stream? And you might have to have a disclaimer. City of Renton and several others did, because people came back and they said, what kind of heartless monsters are you? We want everything, make it all clean and plant trees. And we're like, okay, for this exercise. But come up with some questions, especially at the beginning if it's abstract. Later on, or depending on the type of project you have, if it's like a design project, just put a couple different alternatives and say, we could do this or this or this. Make sure, all of them are something that your organization is willing to commit to. But if it for more abstract stuff, like a lot of the planning that gets done, give them some guided questions, but make sure that they're fair and balanced. And then also, this is just, I always have to put this disclaimer in here, make sure that there's context and landmarks in any of the visuals that you put out. How many times have we all been to a public meeting and they'll show like a basin map and it's all topographic? And there's folks, all the neighbors are like, wait, where do I live? Are there streets on this map? Make sure that there's parks and landmarks and road names and everything, put it into the context. And then also, if you're talking about abstract concepts or something that maybe is not common vernacular for the public, like you say, oh, this is city stormwater program. Well, what exactly is involved in the city stormwater program? Put some examples of people doing city stormwater management. So include visuals. The type of project will really help you dictate what kind of outreach you want to do. Almost always you will do online outreach, where this is our world, and it's a really good tool. If you have sensitive information, if the timing really matters or the context really matters, do not splash everything out online. Have a few focused meetings with the right people first. But almost always you're going to at least start with just some maps on one page of the city or county or your organization's website. And then I'm going to show you how to get the word out to get people to look at that. Print, sometimes like we have a project we're working on right now, and it's a retrofit of a pond, and the road right by where it goes when they do construction, that's how everybody drops their kid off at school. We are going to put some flyers at the school. We're going to make sure that people know who to complain to or who to ask questions for. So sometimes print, if focused, can be really good. And then in person, that same pond, the city doesn't actually own the land that the pond is on. It's owned by a private homeowner, and there's an easement on it. So you better believe part of the public outreach is going to be having some in-person meetings with that homeowner and their neighbors and making sure everything's good. So let's talk a bit about translations. Again, I'm trying to help you guys with right size, like what can you do, on a foundational level. Plain talk. What we found, we really dug into this with the S maps. And for, here you can see Renton's, we went ahead and translated it for them in a couple different languages. Russian is big in Renton. But in the end, what we found, be aware that a lot of your community members out there, if their native language is not the predominant language that is spoken where they live, they have apps that they like. They have translation services. They have things on their phones. They have websites that they use all the time to translate all sorts of stuff. But if it's really jargony and the language is really complicated, their translation bots are not going to be able to translate your stuff well for them. So use plain talk. And I know it's tiny, but there's even a post from Governor Inslee about one of his initiatives about plain talk that gives some guidance about that. But the idea is, go back and read it, use Google Translate, find somebody in your office that speaks a different language, and see how the language is coming across. So content, what are you going to put in this? You need a lot less fancy than you think you do. You have maps, and even if you have a halfway decent sketch or drawing, there's a lot of this that you can put up on the website, on your website. Start with the best graphics you can, find a halfway decent PDF annotator and put some marks or some shapes and just let folks know what you're talking about. I will say, and we've seen this time and time again, please do not take this information and print out a little trifold brochure and stick it in one of those hangers over in the permitting office and walk away. That is not public outreach. Sometimes those little trifold brochures are great. You can bring them to the school when everybody's mad about the traffic, that's fine. But get a little bit more information out on your website. Then that's about your project and what you know. We worked with the city of Camas on the SNAPs, and Camas was like, we don't even have a GIS department. You know, what do you want us to do? I was like, do you have maps? Do you have reports that other people have done for you? They're like, well, sure. Like, put those, you know, obviously, you know, you have hired Parametrix and we're gonna make really pretty maps for you. But, you know, if we weren't here, do this. Oh yeah, and then here's a really pretty map that we made for Camas. So we built them a whole story map, and this thing scrolls and there's all sorts of information on there. And the story map wound up being like at the heart, that was the links that they put on Twitter and everything else. But it could have just been a single web page that they had put a few things on if they couldn't afford, you know, they didn't have the ecology grant that helped them hire us. If you want to go deeper, and then you don't have a lot of monitoring data, or you're trying to tell the public, you know, maybe you need some more information about the water quality and what's going on in the region. There's a lot of other. Rule number one to right-size public outreach is do not start from scratch. Rule number two of right-size public outreach is do not start from scratch. So there's a lot of information. Washington Stormwater Center. I mean, I gave them a whole slide later because they threw us a conference. Ecology's environmental information management database with all the monitoring data from everybody everywhere, and so forth. So there's a lot of good information out there. Environmental justice. So I recently heard a story about a structural engineer that was like, yes, I'm here for this, you know, I understand, but I'm a structural engineer. I build bridges. How am I gonna make an equitable bridge? You know, we're like, let's unpack this for you. So there's everything goes into everything that we do. You know, you can make a very inequitable bridge. You know, is there a flyover? Are you missing all the frontage roads? What businesses are you impacting or cutting off based on the access of the bridge? When are you constructing it? Is there a cultural festival going on that you don't know and you're completely annihilating it? So forth. So yes, bridges can be inequitable. So I really like this first one here, the Washington Department of Health disparity map. This first link that I have here, that's this purple one. And this is actually, we're gonna make, this was just the draft and I was in a hurry, but we're gonna make a nicer version of this for the City of Seattle Comp Plan Environmental Impact Statement. But it shows quickly and includes not just environmental hazards, but also goes into socioeconomic disparities and income and school and education and second languages. And so you can see all those things at once. And then also for even more links, this is my plug for Washington Stormwater Center. A lot of the links that are on here, you're not meant to read this. This is all going to be published online later. But a lot of the links that they have on there are some of the stuff I already talked about. But they, and then in addition, they also have good examples of the way other people have done it if you're trying to brainstorm and get ideas for your organization. For communication strategy, I feel like this is where I get asked questions, and I really, this is the slide. So how did you have all this information? You've put together these good looking, you know, not fancy figures. What do you do next? Almost always, you're going to tweet this out. You're going to use social media. You're going to make sure you're going to post it on the Facebook and in your newsletter and everything, at the very least. Now, what you can do in addition to that is find your community advocates. So not everybody has this, but like City of Renton, for example, has the Mayoral Inclusion Committee. And they've got the association, how are we doing? Okay, so they've got the Association of Black Pastors, they've got all these different organizations on there. And so they could reach out and contact groups that already have relationships. Talk to your other departments, talk to the guys in the transportation and parks and so forth to see if they have people that they normally email for their projects. Do a crossover, you know, get them involved in, use email trees to spread the word about your stormwater project. Don't try and do a mailer. If you are already set up to do mailers, bless you. That's really, really hard. At the very least, put the URL for your, and a lot of our SMAP cities did this, put the URL for that website that you've created on the utility bill. So your utility bills can be a really good mailer that's already set up if you're going to do something like that. And then Christina Lothian, who is not in this room today, but she's here today, impressed the heck out of me. And she was like, oh, I made a whole board and I went to the farmer's market and I have everybody vote on it. She got like 200 comments out of that. So bringing it all together, so we're wrapping it up here. This is an example of the pairwise comparison that I was talking about. Remember, in that communication plan that I was telling you about, where success metrics, you cannot measure the rate or the success of your program by how many comments received. You don't have any control over that. We had different cities do exactly the same thing. Some of them got 200 comments, and then there was another one that got that one troll comment that I mentioned yesterday, where the guy said, everybody should be fired. I don't want to pay any more money for stormwater. So, but measure it by how many posts did you get? How many different avenues did you reach out to? And if you can track the location of the comments, that one gets tricky because people want their privacy. They don't want to always give you their address. If you have a map where you can put pins, sometimes that's good. You need a GIS department to do that. Sometimes you can just say, hey, what's your zip code? But then we had other places that were like, we're a small city. We only have one zip code, so it doesn't really help us, you know, but do what you can to see, make sure, because if all the comments are clustered over here with the families that like only one person works and the other person has lots of time to fill in online surveys, and then these guys over here that are working like 3 jobs and don't even have like extra childcare for their kids and have no time to fill in your survey aren't being heard, that helps you to understand. So, and then, as I said before, remember, this is the light version. The final decision lies with you. This is not a scientific poll. You're just trying to get the word out. And then we're running out of time, and I want to make sure to hear your questions. These were a couple questions that came up in a different session that we did this. How much is this going to cost? The point is, it depends. It costs less if you know that you're doing public outreach at the beginning. Because if you're making a map for your project, or you're making a sketch, or you're doing a little write-up, and then you pause and you're like, hey, if we change this paragraph by like 3 sentences, we could put it on the website. So know that you're doing that public outreach from the very beginning, and it will be cheaper because you can just generate those materials as you go through the project. Convincing management, city council is your friend, or they can be your biggest foe. Make sure that you involve city council in whatever. Some of them just want to be left alone. Some of them want to know everything that you're doing and the name of your pony. So they can help you convince management. And then these are some other methods as well. What about schools? It all depends. If you really want to try to get involved with schools, my recommendation is reach out to the Parent-Teacher Association or the individual schools, and just try and be patient, because frankly, it's hell at schools right now, and they're doing the best they can. That's it. Okay, thank you.